I feel like I'm harping on the same thing, but I think one of my jobs is to say the same thing in lots of different ways. So I wanted to talk again tonight about this idea of the self and identity and what the self is and isn't. And somebody asked me, who was it that asked me what I taught? And I said I taught everything that I need to learn myself. So this is always for myself as well as sharing it with you. I want to start with something by Lao Tzu, which I'll come back to, which I randomly found and kind of fits in with what I was going to talk about. And this may sound paradoxical in the Zen context, but this is what he says. If you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. And if you want to be straight, let yourself be crooked. And if you want to be full, let yourself be empty. Pretty Chinese, isn't it? If you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. If you want to become straight, let yourself be crooked. And if you want to become full, let yourself be empty. So you remind me to come back to that at the very end, because it kind of, hopefully it will tie in. So going back to the very, very beginning, to the historical Buddha's realization, and what started him off on his path was that he realized that there are our identity, the part we call ourselves, i.e. me or you, is pretty much from the day we're born on its way out. The part that we call me, I, you, it's always heading towards annihilation, which you could call the basis of suffering, because you wouldn't, what finally is this all about? If that's the inevitable outcome. And as you know, his questioning started when he saw for the first time old age, sickness, and death, and wondered what on earth, like all of us might do, what on earth is that all about? And what he did was look at it really pragmatically and what was its reality. And so his path, his mission, if you like, was about the reduction of suffering. It wasn't in a way, although we could call it a spiritual path. It was a direct response to what he saw as the difficulty of being alive. And his realization was something that he experienced and not something that he knew. Because if you know something, then obviously there's a knower and a known. And so there's immediately separation. So that's why this whole thing is so difficult to talk about, because he experienced his true identity. But it was very hard to talk about it because it wasn't something that, it wasn't like knowledge, it wasn't something that he knew. It was something that you could be rather than something you could know. And what he realized and what he discovered, is that the right word? What he realized, what he experienced was, to put it really simply, is that everything is one, everything is connected, and that is our true identity. But it can't be grasped, and that's where our kind of dualistic logical view finds it really difficult to deal with. This oneness, this thing that cannot be grasped because to grasp it, you would need to be outside of it. And you can't be outside of it because it's everything. So you can only experience it, just as, we talked about it a lot. You you can't taste your own tongue, you can't see your own eyes. You know, you are it, so you can't know it, you can just experience it. But then, of course, then the question then comes up, well, if you remember, one of the very first Zen stories is when Bodhidharma met the Emperor of China, and he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I don't know." You know, I think all of us, if we were asked, "Who are you?" and we said we don't know, everybody would be as perplexed as the Emperor was. You know, what the hell? Who is this guy who doesn't know who he is? You know. But he didn't know. What he didn't know was the totality of his being. He couldn't. That's what he didn't know. He couldn't know it. It wasn't that he didn't know what his name was or where he was from. Anyway, so if I speak about that and I experience that, and you speak about that and you experience that, we then come up with the question of, well, what is this personal individual identity that each of us for sure have? Where does that fit in? And we talked last week about the leaves on a tree, that we're both the leaves and with the tree, you know, but the leaves fall off and they die and they compost the ground and they help the tree to grow and all, you know, that whole analogy. But another analogy which is also good to explain this strange business of our individuality within the context of it all being whole. A metaphor I'm sure you've all come across, which is the waves on the ocean. So, you know, we are the waves, but we're also the ocean. Our suffering comes when we forget that we're ocean as well as waves. We just think we're waves, and we're going to be submerged in the ocean. And of course, the idea of this small self being submerged in the greater ocean is scary. You don't kind of want to be submerged. And yet, at the same time, there's a part of you that's saying, that's kind of magnetically pulled toward the feeling that if you did let go, if you did surrender this self, you would be better off, or your well-being would improve, but it's really hard to do. But we are the waves, and there is the ocean, and waves definitely exist. You and I definitely exist. We definitely have individual taste. We definitely have individual preferences, and in a way, that's wondrous as well, isn't it? Isn't that fantastic? Wouldn't it be boring if we were all just ocean? So it's our being totally identified with being a wave that the Buddha saw caused us suffering. Whilst thinking about this talk, I also realised in the context of reading something else how this if the ocean was kind of emptiness and the wave is form, that incidentally that's where the Zen strange paradox comes up, where we all get a bit confused by when we say delusion is enlightenment and enlightenment is delusion, because the nature of delusion and the nature of enlightenment are exactly the same. It's like a wave is water and the ocean is water. There isn't any difference. So that's one way of looking at this strange delusion as enlightenment is delusion. I can say a bit more about that later. But I also wanted to insert here the difficulty in the West and is that we identify with the relative, because our Western way of thought, culturally, is that we think of a beginning, a middle and an end. You know, so we think we're born, we only have this life, and we've got to do all we can in this life, and then we die, and that's it, full stop. That's one way we could look at it culturally from a Western perspective. So you could kind of call that form. The Eastern perspective is that it isn't linear, that it's actually cyclical or is it cyclical or cyclic? You know, in a circle, cyclical, and there's rebirth. You know, so this one time around isn't our only chance. The whole thing goes in a circle. So there's creation and there's death. There's life. There's rebirth. There's another life. There's another rebirth, and the whole thing goes round in a circle. You could perhaps use that as a metaphor for emptiness. That it doesn't end. A circle doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an end. It's beginningless and endless. Now, which side of the coin you fall on seems to me to depend on our nature, our personality. I don't know. I really don't. I absolutely really don't know which it is. Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's both. I don't know whether there's rebirth. I don't know whether this is the only chance we've got or not. But if it is the only chance we've got, maybe we shouldn't take any chances and we should live it to the full if we can. At least to cover ourselves. So this idea of waves and the ocean, and what is this self that we carry around? What is this identity that we have that in some quarters is kind of demeaned, is seen as a problem, is seen the cause of our suffering? Well, I think we've all got to honestly own up and acknowledge that we certainly feel it exists. Is that right? I mean, nobody feels that they're kind of floating or ethereal, or we all feel rooted, don't we, in who we are. Well, my suggestion is that the kind of the one leaf free from this paradox, or the truth, the real koan, the only real koan we'll ever have to work on. And we work on koans, but our own. I imagine our ongoing and authentic koan for each of us is the question of life and death. And the koan gets more urgent as you get older. Although it can strike at any time, I think any of us, meet folk in their teens who fret about life and death. But that is our koan, life and death. And how do we tackle that? And my sense is the only way to tackle it is to completely, and I've said it before, so I'm sorry about repeating, is to really embrace your life completely. Is to just hold the whole thing, everything, all the good things, or the bad things, or the things you look forward to, or the judgments you make about yourself and about other people. The whole thing, really embrace it. Because where else is there to go, really? I mean, what else have you got to understand and experience this paradox of what life is about, except to embrace everything that comes up, and out of that, whatever understanding arises for you out of that, at least you know that you've given it your full shot and it's authentic. That you haven't kind of, backed away out, which we all will do. We back away out of fear as well, of really embracing it. And none of us know how we're going to be until the shit hits the fan, for sure. Any of us. So please don't let's be judgmental of anyone either. But to embrace our lives completely is, for me, realization. And maybe you have a different sense of it, but that's why I read that poem at the very beginning, because in the poem, I'll just say it again, he says, if you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. And remember that there's a famous koan, isn't it? Above all, don't pick and choose. Above all, don't pick and choose. Which seems to be in contradiction to this. But it's not, because if you let yourself be partial completely without judgment, then that's fine. That is allowing yourself to be whole. That's not cutting off part of yourself, saying that's not allowed. And equally, if you want to become straight, let yourself be crooked. Well, if you want to feel authentic, I would call that straight, then you have to allow your own idiosyncrasies and your own way of being in the world freedom of expression. So you're not kind of suppressing yourself, you're allowing yourself, your own uniqueness to arise, and you're not keeping it down out of fear. And then if you want to become full, let yourself be empty. And that makes huge sense to me, because if you want to be really full, then you have to make a lot of space for the stuff to come in. You know? So if you want to really enjoy a sunset, there has to be a lot of space. You can't have your head full of all your frets and your worries and your doubts and your fears. You have to have a lot of space in there to really enjoy it, you know. So if you want to become full, let yourself be empty. None of this is easy, is it? So, anyway, that's what's that thing they have every morning on the thought for today? That's thought for today over. Sorry. Quite brief thought for today, but I'm sure some of you got something to say about it. Yeah.
I really like the stuff from Lao Tzu.
Yeah.
Because it was that school that developed the idea of yin and yang.
Yeah.
That the whole thing about complementary opposites, and it's the very opposite nature which actually defines and gives value to the other thing.
Yeah, well said.
So you can't be full unless you've experienced emptiness. It's like you don't enjoy food unless you're really hungry.
Yeah. You should turn that round to you now.
No. So for me that makes complete sense. And this thing about allowing yourself to be crooked, to be straight. I've really struggled with that one, but I'm actually getting much easier at flaunting my own vices. And I'm feeling much more authentic. And
go easy.
Next week. But it actually feels much more authentic if I'm not trying to keep to some rigid picture of myself and how I should be.
Yeah. Thank you, that's great. Morris? Yeah.
I'm quite an old person.
Relatively.
Quite old. And I'd love to echo everything that you said.
Thank you.
Especially for the benefit of all you young people. So please remember what Sensei said. There's nothing more important than that.
Morris, thank you. It's very nice to say something nice about me. Usually you give me... Thank you. It's very kind.
You know, the ideas of an idealized self, and Andy was hinting that's kind of what causes. How do you marry up ambition and motivation to be a certain way against how you are?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. Mm-hmm. You know, I read and in the Financial Times magazine, which I shouldn't give away, I read sometimes, the shrink, and every week they have the shrink and the philosopher answering a question. This was the very question they asked this week: how do you marry, being and being present to ambition and they gave lots of techniques. I can't remember one. Yeah, I'll keep it for you. Yeah. But that was a really good question. How do you do that? How do you? Yeah, I'm sure. I think you can definitely manage both if you've got both in mind, and and you're au fait with the idea that they're not mutually exclusive. And I know that you can hang out easy, better than I. So your ambition can be easily modulated by your ability to hang out.
I was going to say maybe with Tamati's question is what I try and do in terms of being authentic, which is challenging sometimes, is to try and live in accordance with what my values are, which for me are as close as possible to being authentic.
Yeah.
And therefore try and set goals, which is the ambition and motivation piece, that align to my values, but my values, not someone else's values.
Okay.
I think sometimes we have to toe the line, if we're in a work situation or whatever, to some degree, but I think the wisdom comes from knowing when you're moving too much away from being authentic for you and what that means as an individual versus the status quo and what other people's agendas are.
Yeah, that's a lovely answer, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
But it's not easy.
Pardon?
It's
no, none of this is easy.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks.